you ask people in this country what they consider to be the biggest sin, I wonder what you think they'd say. Maybe they would say, well, murder's a pretty big sin, or child abuse, or something like rape. If you were to ask the same question of churchgoers, what would they say? Maybe they would think about the Ten Commandments and say breaking one of the Ten Commandments is a pretty big sin. But you know, if you look at the Bible, you would get a different answer again. I would say if you study the Bible, right through the Bible, there is an emphasis on the importance of belief. So unbelief would be considered to be a very big sin because it prevents someone from having a relationship with God. But to me, the standout sin, which might surprise you, would be the sin of pride. Pride. And pride is mentioned a lot in the Bible. And we read, for instance, in the book of James in the New Testament, that God resists the proud, he opposes the proud. And I would suggest to you that maybe God's people don't take this sin seriously enough. So we're going to have a reading now, and the reading is going to be from Daniel chapter 4. We're going to listen to the whole passage being read. It's quite a long chapter, so thank you very much, Lorraine.
The reading is taken from Daniel chapter 4, and it's from 1 to 37. Nebuchadnezzar's dream of a tree. King Nebuchadnezzar, to the peoples, nations and men of every language who live in all the world, may you prosper greatly. It is my pleasure to tell you about the miraculous signs and wonders that the Most High God has performed for me. How great are his signs, how mighty his wonders. His kingdom is an eternal kingdom. His dominion endures from generation to generation. I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at home in my palace, contented and prosperous. I had a dream that made me afraid. As I was lying in my bed, the images and visions that passed through my mind terrified me. So I commanded that all the wise men of Babylon be brought before me to interpret the dream for me. When the magicians, enchanters, astrologers and diviners came, I told them the dream, but they could not interpret it for me. Finally, Daniel came into my presence, and I told him the dream. He is called Belteshazzar, after the name of my God, and the spirit of the holy gods is in him. I said, Belteshazzar, chief of the magicians, I know that the spirit of the holy gods is in you, and no mystery is too difficult for you. Here is my dream, interpret it for me. These are the visions I saw while lying in my bed. I looked, and there before me stood a tree in the middle of the land. Its height was enormous. The tree grew large and strong, and its top touched the sky. It was visible to the ends of the earth. Its leaves were beautiful, its fruit abundant, and on it was food for all. Under it the beasts of the field found shelter, and the birds of the air lived in its branches. From it every creature was fed. In the visions I saw while lying in my bed, I looked, and there before me was a messenger, a holy one, coming down from heaven. He called in a loud voice, Cut down the tree and trim off its branches. Strip off its leaves and scatter its fruit. Let the animals flee from under it, and the bird from its branches. But let the stump and its roots, bound with iron and bronze, remain in the ground in the grass of the field. Let him be drenched with the dew of heaven, and let him live with the animals among the plants of the earth. Let his mind be changed from that of a man, and let him be given the mind of an animal, till 7 times pass by for him. The decision is announced by messengers. The holy ones declare the verdict, so that the living may know that the Most High is sovereign over the kingdoms of men and gives them to anyone he wishes and sets over them the lowliest of men. This is the dream that I, King Nebuchadnezzar, had. Now, Belteshazzar, tell me what it means, for none of the wise men in my kingdom can interpret it for me. but you can because the spirit of the holy gods is in you." Then Daniel, also called Belteshazzar, was greatly perplexed for a time, and his thoughts terrified him. So the king said, "Belteshazzar, do not let the dream or its meaning alarm you." Belteshazzar answered, "My lord, if only the dream applied to your enemies and its meaning to your adversaries. The tree you saw, which grew large and strong, with its top touching the sky, visible to the whole earth, with beautiful leaves and abundant fruit, providing food for all, giving shelter to the beasts of the field, and having nesting places in its branches for the birds of the air. You, O king, are that tree. You have become great and strong. Your greatness has grown until it reaches the sky, and your dominion extends to distant parts of the earth. You, O king, saw a messenger, a holy one, coming down from heaven and saying, 'Cut down the tree and destroy it, but leave the stump bound with iron and bronze in the grass of the field, while its roots remain in the ground. Let him be drenched with the dew of heaven. Let him live like the wild animals, until 7 times pass by for him.' This is the interpretation, O king, and this is the decree the Most High has issued against my lord the king. You will be driven away from people and will live like the wild animals. You will eat grass like cattle and be drenched with the dew of heaven. 7 times will pass by for you until you acknowledge that the Most High is sovereign over the kingdoms of men and gives them to anyone he wishes. The command to leave the stump of the tree with its roots means that your kingdom will be restored to you when you acknowledge that heaven rules. Therefore, O king, be pleased to accept my advice. Renounce your sins by doing what is right, and your wickedness by being kind to the oppressed. It may be then that your prosperity will continue." All this happened to King Nebuchadnezzar. 12 months later, as the king was walking on the roof of the royal palace of Babylon, he said, "Is not this the great Babylon that I have built as the royal residence by my mighty power and for the glory of my majesty?" The words were still on his lips when a voice came from heaven. "This is what is decreed for you, King Nebuchadnezzar. Your royal authority has been taken from you. You will be driven away from people and will live with the wild animals. You will eat grass like cattle. 7 times will pass by for you until you acknowledge that the Most High is sovereign over the kingdoms of men and gives them to anyone he wishes." Immediately what had been said about Nebuchadnezzar was fulfilled. He was driven away from people and ate grass like cattle. His body was drenched with the dew of heaven until his hair grew like the feathers of an eagle and his nails like the claws of a bird. At the end of that time, I, Nebuchadnezzar, raised my eyes towards heaven, and my sanity was restored. Then I praised the Most High. I honoured and glorified him who lives forever. His dominion is an eternal dominion. His kingdom endures from generation to generation. All the peoples of the earth are regarded as nothing. He does as he pleases with the powers of heaven and the peoples of the earth. No one can hold back his hand or say to him, "What have you done?" At the same time that my sanity was restored, my honour and splendour were returned to me for the glory of my kingdom. My advisers and nobles sought me out, and I was restored to my throne and became even greater than before. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and exalt and glorify the King of heaven, because everything he does is right and all his ways are just. And those who walk in pride, he is able to humble.
Okay, thank you. So, an unusual story. We're in the book of Daniel. Nebuchadnezzar is the king in Babylon. God's people are in captivity. And what we have there in that story here in Daniel chapter 4 is God speaking to King Nebuchadnezzar through a dream. A very strange dream. I'm standing here with a handsome tree behind me because Nebuchadnezzar had a dream about a tree. And let me remind you a verse from the reading. Nebuchadnezzar, talking about the dream, said, I looked, and there before me stood a tree in the middle of the land. Its height was enormous. The tree grew large and strong. Its top touched the sky, and it was visible to the ends of the earth. Its leaves were beautiful, its fruit abundant, and on it was food for all. Under it, the wild animals found shelter, and the birds lived in its branches. From it, every creature was fed. So here we have a very, very impressive tree indeed. But then the dream goes on very weirdly, because within Nebuchadnezzar's dream, this enormous tree ends up being cut down, and then, believe it or not, and unbelievable things happen sometimes in dreams, don't they? Well, in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, this tree becomes insane. The tree becomes insane. So the job of Daniel, who had the gift of interpreting dreams, was to be able to explain the meaning of the dream to Nebuchadnezzar. He'd had experience of this. In fact, back in Daniel chapter 2, he had the onerous task of not only giving the interpretation, but having to tell the king what the dream was in the first place, because evidently the king couldn't remember what the dream was, and Daniel came up trumps. God gave him all the information that he needed. So this time the job was a bit simpler, because Nebuchadnezzar was able to remember his dream, and Daniel had the responsibility of bringing an interpretation, of explaining to Nebuchadnezzar what God was saying to him through this dream. And this is what Daniel said. Your Majesty, you are that tree. You have become great and strong. Your greatness has grown till it reaches the sky, and your dominion extends to distant parts of the earth. But you will be driven away from people and will live with wild animals. You will eat grass like an ox and be drenched with the dew of heaven. And 7 times will pass by for you until you acknowledge that the Most High is sovereign over all the kingdoms on earth, and that God gives them to anyone he wishes. Well, so Nebuchadnezzar was very grateful to Daniel for giving an interpretation of the dream. You would have thought that Nebuchadnezzar would be very alarmed at that prophecy. Actually, what Daniel said to the king is that this is a punishment that's coming your way because you're too proud, but that punishment is avoidable if you come to your senses. If you acknowledge God for who he is, then you may be able to avoid this punishment. And even if this happens to you, it's not necessarily terminal. Daniel adds all of these things as well in his explanation. However, does Nebuchadnezzar listen? Well, we'll come on to that shortly. But one of the reasons that I chose this passage today is because of a question I think that people often don't ask. And the question is this: whether dreams are significant, whether dreams mean anything. And for those of us who believe in God, who follow God, we ask the question, does God actually speak through dreams? Does he speak through dreams? Well, what do you think? What do you think today? Has God ever spoken to you through one of your dreams? It's a pertinent question because God speaks in many ways. And certainly in Bible times, God clearly spoke through dreams right through the Bible. In the Old Testament, we've got Joseph and Jacob. We've got Nebuchadnezzar here. In the New Testament, the story of the baby Jesus is surrounded by different people having dreams. So there are many dreams in the Bible which God spoke through. Does he still speak through dreams today? Well, what's exciting in some parts of the world is that there is evidence that people are actually becoming Christians. Why? Because of a dream that they've had. Very often people say that they had a dream, and in the dream they were aware of the person of Jesus. And maybe they're people from other religions, and suddenly they realize that Jesus was a real person, and they become Christians as a result of their dreams. So clearly, if their testimony is valid and reliable, God does speak through dreams today. And not just for people to become Christians, but in all kinds of ways. And I certainly know people who are Christians who would say that God has spoken to them, and that maybe someone else has been able to help them to understand what that dream meant. I remember many, many years ago, when I hadn't been a Christian very long, that I had a very vivid dream one night, and in the dream, the second coming of Jesus was taking place. It was really taking place, and I was so excited. I remember in the dream thinking, it's true. It's really happening. This is wonderful. It's really true. Isn't this incredible? And then, you know what, it was very disappointing because I woke up and I was disappointed because I realised, oh, it was just a dream. But I felt that what God was saying to me at that time is that I should not doubt the fact that Jesus has come once, and one day he will come a second time, and that he's coming especially for people like me who have put my trust in him and have started to follow him. So do I think that God speaks through dreams today? Yes, I do. Do I think that sometimes God gives a special gift of dream interpretation to particular people? Yes, I do. What do you think? Okay, so let's get back to the story here in Daniel chapter 4. Did Nebuchadnezzar learn the lesson? He had the warning from God through the dream. And I'm afraid he didn't learn the lesson. God had basically said to him, your kingdom is impressive, but you've become very proud. You're not giving me the glory for it. And if you continue in this way, then there will be serious consequences. Well, Nebuchadnezzar continued on the same old way, took himself far too seriously, became more and more proud. And 12 months later, after having that dream, he was out and about and very proud about Babylon. Is not this the great Babylon I have built as my royal residence by my mighty power for the glory of my majesty? And at that very moment, the prediction that Daniel had given 12 months before came true, that God reduced Nebuchadnezzar down to size, that Nebuchadnezzar was punished by God, and he understood that this is what was going on, and there would be a great contrast. Just in the dream, we had this impressive tree representing Nebuchadnezzar and his amazing kingdom, and now suddenly the tree would be chopped down. It would be like this stump behind me. That would represent what Nebuchadnezzar was becoming, just a stump. And actually, he started to believe that he was an animal. He started to behave like an animal. And the modern medical term for that, because there is a medical term, it's called lycanthropy. So there are modern equivalents. It's pretty rare. So this is something which is not a one-off. People do have this problem, and God inflicted on him on that particular occasion. So Nebuchadnezzar, he started to lose his mind, started to believe that he was an animal, behaved like an animal, and God really brought him down to size. And of course, people are proud in all sorts of ways. I know some of you like my stories, so let me share one with you. This is a true story. And this is a story from church. And it was a woman who used to go to that church, and she was very proud about her looks. And one day she told the minister, she said to him, every time I'm at church, I look round at all the other women, and I'm so proud to be the prettiest one in the whole of the congregation. And she said to the minister, what can I do about this situation? Well, do you know what the minister said to her? What he said to her is, that's not a sin, that's just a delusion. Pretty brutal, eh? Pretty brutal. So just as God reduced Nebuchadnezzar down to size, that's exactly what that minister did, rightly or wrongly. Probably hurt that woman's feelings. That woman who thought she was so beautiful and felt bad about it. And then the minister said, actually, you're deluded. So her pride was well and truly punctured on that particular occasion. So people are proud in all kinds of ways, for all kinds of reasons. And as Christians, we have to take this seriously. It's a kind of sin that people feel is no big deal. But actually the Bible tells us that this is something which can affect our relationship with God. What happens with Nebuchadnezzar in Daniel chapter 4? Well, what happens is that as Daniel had predicted, this illness would not necessarily be terminal, and that proved to be the case, that Nebuchadnezzar eventually responds to God. He responds to the God of heaven. And he discovers something about Daniel's God. He discovers that this God does as he pleases. This God does as he pleases. Eventually, Nebuchadnezzar acknowledges this God and his sanity is restored. It's interesting that there are Christians who really don't believe that God acts in a kind of a chastening way, that God never disciplines people. I don't know why they would say that, because it happens right through the Bible. God disciplining people, indeed punishing people at times. Of course, Jesus died on the cross for us, and all the punishment that God requires in terms of our mistakes, etc., has been paid by his son on the cross. But that doesn't necessarily mean that he won't discipline us when necessary. And we need to recognize that God resists the proud. He resists the proud. He gives grace to the humble. So Nebuchadnezzar, at last, he learns to become humble. He learns his lesson. He said this, "Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and exalt and glorify the King of heaven, because everything he does is right and all his ways are just, and those who walk in pride he is able to humble." Now, we know from previous chapters in the book of Daniel that Nebuchadnezzar had been impressed by Daniel's God, but now he goes a step further because he acknowledges that this God is greater than he is. Now, the jury is out in terms of whether King Nebuchadnezzar becomes a follower of the only true God. We're not explicitly told that, so we don't know. You'll have to speculate for yourself about that one. But certainly if he doesn't become a follower of God, he does become someone who really respects Daniel's God as a true God, as a living God, as a powerful God, a God who does what he wants to do. So he learns the lesson. He learns that pride is a dangerous vice to exhibit, and that there is a God who will react to a display of pride the way that Nebuchadnezzar behaved on a regular basis. As I conclude this morning, I want to bring you one more story. This is a very light-hearted story about two ducks and a frog, and the three of them used to hang out together, and they used to play in a pond until the pond dried up, and so they had to move. The two ducks didn't have any problem because they could go to another pond, they could fly off to another pond, but the frog was stuck. The frog had a problem, but the frog suggested to the two ducks that they take him with them. And the plan, the frog's idea, was for the ducks to hold a stick, so there'd be a stick in the bill of each duck that the frog could hang onto with his mouth as they flew to another pond with the frog hanging on. And the plan worked a treat until there was a farmer that went by that looked up, saw this scene, and said, "What a clever idea that is. Who thought of that?" And immediately the frog said, I did. And of course, you know what happened. So, pride comes before a fall. Pride comes before a fall. And that rather silly story illustrates that point. But it's a serious statement that we need to take seriously. Pride comes before a fall. And you only have to read the pages of the Bible to discover the seriousness of the sin of pride. There are many people in the Bible who never found God. Why? Because they were too proud. You only have to see the conversations that took place between Jesus and the religious leaders, between the Pharisees and the scribes and the Sadducees. And again and again and again, these religious leaders were so proud. And they were too proud, it would appear, to recognize that this man from Nazareth might actually be the Messiah. And their pride led to them rejecting the Lord Jesus. And there are followers of God in the Bible who went off the rails because of their pride. A man called Uzziah, his pride led to his downfall. So my question to you as I conclude today is this: are you too proud? Are you too proud to do what God calls you to do? Are you too proud? Let me tell you this morning, the lesson that Nebuchadnezzar learned through his dream, through the interpretation, through the fact that he ignored what God was saying to him through that dream, he learned that one of the most important virtues is humility. And let me tell you that God responds to those who are truly humble. So whatever you're going through in your life right now, if you want a close relationship with God, you need to humble yourself before him and listen to him. See what he has to say to you, and you need to trust him for the future. Don't be proud, be humble. Thank you so much for listening. God bless you.